The Senior Rehab Podcast is sponsored by Health IQ. Health IQ is a special rate life insurance company for health-conscious people like you and me. If you're in the market for life insurance to have peace of mind and to protect your family, I'd highly recommend checking out this company. They are the only life insurance company to use data to leverage lower life insurance rates for active individuals. So the result is that 56% of Health IQ customers save between 4 to 33% on their life insurance premiums, which can definitely add up to big savings over time. To find out more information, just go to healthiq.com/SRP to support the show and to get your free quote. Hit me!
This is a Senior Rehab Podcast, the podcast for rehab clinicians that want to better serve older adults.
Hey there, Senior Rehab Podcast listeners. I'm Tali Spaceman.
I'm Erinn Carey.
And welcome to another episode of Shorts. This one is also part of the Frailty series.
Yeah, originally we had decided that we would only be doing 4 Frailty series episodes, but due to the good feedback that we've gotten from you all and some of the conversations we had, we decided to do 1, maybe 2 more.
I hope that it's not gonna be like one of those Netflix series that the first season was really, really good, and then people said, oh, why won't you make a second season, and then it sucked. I really hope it's gonna be like Stranger Things, actually.
Yeah. Well, I mean, some people are pretty critical about Stranger Things.
Oh. Well, people are critical about everything.
That's actually true, including me, about this article. Nice transition.
This was a nice segue!
Yes. Okay, this article is called Effects of Multi-Domain Interventions in Pre-Frail Elderly on Frailty, Functional, and Cognitive Status, a Systematic Review. It's really cool because it looks at not just one intervention addressing frailty, but like nutrition and cognition and psychosocial interventions and, of course, exercise.
Yeah, so it sounds like I'm gonna like it, but by your face...
You'll like it. No, it's really good.
Okay.
Okay, so it starts out first by defining frailty. They do it basically Freed versus Rockwood style, which is old hat for our knowledgeable listeners. But in case this is your first time listening, the Freed criteria for frailty are unintentional weight loss, weakness, exhaustion, slow gait, and low physical activity. If you have 1 to 2 of these indicators, you are considered to be pre-frail. If you have 3 or more, you are to be considered frail. This is by far, at least in the PT literature, the most common way of defining frailty. Next is the Rockwood Frailty Index, which is an accumulation of heterogeneous deficits expressed in a percentage of total deficits. And you're considered to be pre-frail if you have 20 to 35% on this index, and then you are considered to be frail if you have greater than or equal to 35%. So it's like a list of all these deficits, and it's expressed in a percentage. What's nice about the Rockwood Frailty Index is that it also includes cognitive, social, and psychological domains.
Did anybody ever, I don't know, I don't remember if I don't think we covered it in the first episode about definition. Did anybody ever check the validity and like, does Rockwood match Freed? Because like if somebody is pre-frail on Rockwood, but consider frail on Freed, or somebody is considered frail on Freed, but not at all on Rockwood, I'm wondering.
That's a great question. So the Freed criteria, the criticism for them is that they mostly focus on the physical domain, whereas the Rockwood includes other domains. So I would anticipate that the Rockwood criteria are considered to be more stringent,
yeah,
but I'm not sure. That's a good question, though.
Mm-hmm.
So then the article goes on to talk about how the prevalence varies between 4 and 59% of community-dwelling people above 65 are considered to be frail, which I read that 4 to 59% of people over the age of 65.
Yeah, you know how I love big ranges. It's just so specific.
But I looked into the actual source material of that statistic.
Mm-hmm.
It's from a systematic review in 2012, and then their results, they also state there's a weighted value of 10.7%, which has a pretty narrow confidence interval and over 60,000 subjects. So I think that it's much closer to 10% of people over the age of 65 are considered to be frail. But of course, limitations, definitions, etc.
And to be fair, 10 is in that range.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. So about 10%. So frailty is potentially reversible or modifiable by interventions, such as physical exercise plus nutritional interventions, which can affect frailty status, functional outcomes, including gait speed and performance on the short physical performance battery test, as well as cognitive outcomes. There's also a Treating Frailty, a practical guide that was published in 2011. It's free online, and there's this really nice table with succinct suggestions based on common patterns in frailty. So it's a little outdated, but it's not bad. There will be a link to it in the show notes.
Okay.
So the goal of this review is to provide an overview of the effects of controlled multi-domain interventions in pre-frail people aged over 65 years on frailty status and score, cognition, muscle mass strength, muscle power, and functional and social outcomes.
Let's go to the methods.
All right. So the protocol is available on the PROSPERO database, and they use the PRISMA guidelines, which you talked about in a previous episode. So this is the first time I've heard of PROSPERO. It is an international prospective register of systematic reviews, and it's run by the National Institute for Health Research. So I feel a bit like a dork because this is really exciting. But what it does is that it breaks down the protocol down to its basic components. Like, it spells out the specific review question, the search strategy, the population they're interested in, the primary and secondary outcomes, their data extraction methods, which is really important, and also a quality assessment. It also has previous versions of the protocols and notes about revisions. So they submitted their protocol to the PROSPERO people. They gave them feedback on how their search criteria and like their methods could be better, and then they adapted it to have an even more robust search method with even less risk of bias, which I think is so cool.
Yeah, I like that they included it. I'll definitely look it up.
So there will be a link to this PROSPERO page for this article in the show notes as well. It's so cool. So in this particular article, they ended up specifying their review question and adding more outcomes based on the importance to patients and clinicians, as well as several other that I thought they're fine. So then they searched PubMed, nbsp, Pedro Central, and the Cochrane Central Register for Controlled Trials. And they also searched for it in 4 different languages. So they included articles published in English, Dutch, French, or German.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I like when that happens.
Yeah.
Because so many things are limited when you limit yourself to one language. Yeah. Even if it's English or Spanish or you know, some language that a lot of people publish articles in.
Like Mandarin.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. They give a PDF of the specific search terms that they use and the reasons why they excluded some articles over others, with a citation to the article in question. So theoretically, what you could do is find the article and make your own determination and see if you agree, because that's what I do for fun.
I need to find you a hobby.
This is my hobby. So they also include in this PDF an ugly but interesting table about secondary outcomes such as quality of life, psychosocial well-being and depression, and if certain interventions like exercise or nutritional interventions demonstrated changes at 3, 6, and 9-month follow-ups were available. Although there was one acronym that they didn't define on this chart. So they didn't define it on the table, but they did in the body of the paper, but you know, whatever. Okay, so then for their inclusion criteria, they looked for RCTs, quasi-experimental studies, pro or retrospective cohort studies with control groups. They looked at studies testing multi-domain interventions to prevent or treat frailty in persons above the age of 65. That means that these interventions need to be at least 2 of things like exercise, nutritional intervention, hormone therapy, cognitive intervention, and psychosocial interventions. They needed to define frailty or pre-frailty using an operationalized definitions. I don't know what an operationalized definition is.
Okay.
But they actually, they talk about the definitions used in one of the tables in this article and like where their definitions come from. So it's pretty legit.
Okay.
They looked at studies where the primary outcomes were one of these 6 things, which were frailty status or score, muscle mass, strength/power, physical functioning, cognitive outcomes, and social outcomes.
I'm glad the inclusion and exclusion criteria also based on that, because remember that we talked about that in the Game Changers meetup?
Exactly.
And that was my biggest thing was that like that doesn't really measure frailty.
Right.
So if you want to see if an intervention worked on what you wanted to intervene about, the outcome criteria, the outcome measurements needs to be something that is valid and reliable for that thing.
Exactly.
So I'm really glad they used that in the RCT. Kudos. I like you.
Yeah, this article is honestly pretty boss. It's also free and available. It's an open source article.
You just know what to say to a lady, don't you?
Oh, I do. Open source. Okay. So then they discussed the critical appraisal and they evaluated the risk of bias using the Methodological Index for Non-Randomized Studies, or MINORS, criteria. And there's going to be a link in the show notes for the curious, but it's 12 criteria such as whether or not they had proper follow-up, if their control group was appropriate, and if they use adequate statistical analyses. So they really looked into the source material in this review, and they tried to evaluate everything as thoroughly as they could, it seems, within reason. So then for data extraction, they looked at things like study characteristics, frailty tool used, outcome measures, and effect measures, as well as many other things all included on the tables. One thing I don't really like, one person did all the data extraction and then another person checked their work and all disagreements were resolved by discussion. What? Okay.
Like Delphi or?
No, just discussion. So like, here, Tali, let's have a discussion. I like this article because the paper it's printed on is pretty.
This is a valid reason to like an article because you printed it on.
Let's put it in the review. That's a discussion.
I want to give them more credit.
I assume they didn't have that kind of conversation, but I see it so often that like, oh, it was resolved by discussion. Like what rules did you set in this discussion? Like, was it, I really want to include this because XYZ, because I think that it's really important, or like, I don't think it fits because blah, 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 blah. Like, tell us what you discussed.
First rule of discussion, do not talk about the discussion.
That's not how science works. Science is not Fight Club.
Is it? Isn't it?
I mean, most of science isn't Fight Club.
Then what am I in it?
Oh.
Okay, let's
Surprise.
No, but I do think that I assume, like, again, they should have written it down. I assume the discussion means they discuss on why the person included it and why the other person wanted to exclude it based on the inclusion criteria.
Right. We assume, but like...
Yeah, I need it in writing, but...
I can assume things all the time, and that doesn't make them good or worthwhile.
I'm trying to play good cop.
To be fair, I love this article.
Oh yeah, but you can be...
This is how I treat things I love.
I know.
No! No!
It's okay to be critical. It's not only okay, it's blessed. I wish more people in our field were more critical about articles they read or methods that they hear about.
I agree. More criticism is needed within our profession. The outcomes that they were interested in the articles they were searching were... There were primary outcomes, which were frailty status or score, cognition, muscle mass, muscle strength, power, and functional outcomes. Secondary outcomes were quality of life, social involvement, psychosocial well-being, depression, and subjective health. And they said that there was too much variety in the data to do a meta-analysis, unfortunately, which is kind of the story. It's how it goes.
And now a quick break to tell you about our sponsor. This episode of the Senior Rehab Podcast is sponsored by Health IQ. I mentioned before that Health IQ is a special rate life insurance company for health-conscious people like you and me. They have a unique mortality model on health-conscious people that allows them to secure lower rates based on actual data. You can think of it like good driver savings on auto insurance. They also have a unique underwriting process where instead of using common measurements like BMI, they use waist-to-hip ratios, cholesterol calculations, and much more to demonstrate a more accurate view of someone's health. So if you're in the market for life insurance to protect your family and have a little bit of peace of mind, I highly encourage you to go to healthiq.com/SRP to get your free quote and help support the show. Thanks.
So on to the results. Any questions or thoughts or feelings about methods?
I think that I said all my feelings and I said all my thoughts and...
Cool. So on to the results. They started out with their giant like their search terms, you saw it, it's like a couple pages. They had 5,500 results, and the authors read the full texts of all of them.
5,500?
5,500. 5,500. They read all of them, full texts.
Do you think they have families or friends or someone in their life they care about?
No.
God bless the people in science.
Yeah. No joke. And then they gave a Prisma flowchart, which you can see pretty easily in the article, so I'm not going to go through it. But they came up with 24 articles that were about 12 different studies. 5 are from Europe, 2 from the USA, and 5 were from Asia. So most were community-dwelling participants, mostly women, mostly freed criteria on the spectrum from frail to pre-frail, and then controls were not frail. The duration of the interventions varied from 12 weeks to 9 months. The follow-up ranged from 3 to 9 months, and then they came up with all these different tables. So table 2 looks at the quality of studies, and they spell out why each of the studies got the quality score that they did. Table 3 has the characteristics of the interventions, spelling out the content of the interventions, including frequency and duration, what the controls did, and that frequency, as well as information about the compliance of the subjects. And I wrote in my notes, sweet table. It's really sweet.
Oh, no, it's not ugly?
No, it could be prettier, but it's like very informative.
It could be prettier, but it has great personality.
Yeah. Okay, table 4 has frailty outcomes post-interventions, and so they have follow-ups of 3 months prior to the end of intervention, if available, immediately post, 3 to 4 month follow-up, 6 month follow-up, and 9 month follow-up. In my notes, I wrote, another freaking sweet table. So then tables 5 through 7 spell out the results specific to the frailty phenotype. So 1 shows the changes in muscle mass with the same timelines. And all these tables have the citation and the type of interventions they looked at. So like exercise plus nutrition or exercise plus cognitive plus nutrition.
It sounds like an article with a lot of tables.
11.
I like tables.
Me too.
You're less able to change tables in order to show or present what you want to present as opposed to graphs.
Exactly. Like messing with the scales, whereas the tables are like the numbers.
Yeah. It's still, you can still do it. You know, you can.
Oh, you can.
You can, but I like that it has tables.
Same.
Also, I'm very dyslexic. It's really hard for me to read, and so it's easy for me when things are displayed in a simple way.
I'm a very visual person, so having things like tables and graphs and charts, I just love.
Yeah. Okay,
so table 6 was the change in muscle strength. There was no table on the exhaustion. None of the articles described any changes to self-reported exhaustion in their results. And then table 7 shows gait speed and physical activity, and it's all the same follow-up periods. So like immediately 3 to 4 months, 6 months, and 9 months. So then table 8 shows the changes in physical functioning as per the short physical performance battery and the Tinetti scale. Table 9 shows muscle power. Table 10 shows gait ability, balance, functional lower extremity strength, and falls. And table 11 shows the results in cognitive status.
I like when researchers, when they write the article, you can see when an article was written so somebody will read it and implement what's in it.
Exactly.
And that's what, again, I haven't seen the article. I am only hearing from you. But from what I hear, it sounds like an article of, here, we researched that. We really want you to use those things. It's not just so our name will be on an article.
Yeah, that's exactly the point that I forgot to write down, but I'm really glad you brought up. So what you can do is say like you have a patient who is considered to be frail and like you really want to work on muscle strength. So you could take table 6, which shows the changes in muscle strength, look at the different interventions they used and the time periods, and you can base your intervention on that.
That's great.
Yeah. So then on to the discussion. They state that multi-domain interventions show a greater beneficial impact compared to monodomain interventions. For example, it'd be nutritional intervention alone, or usual care for frailty characteristics, physical functioning, and muscle mass and strength. They note that physical exercise seems to play an essential role in the multi-domain intervention, with some improvements by an additional intervention, like nutrition. The positive effects of nutritional supplementation increase when associated with physical exercise and vice versa. So physical exercise and nutritional supplementation, when used together, can give you really robust outcomes.
That makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah. They also say specifically that physical exercise plus nutritional interventions improve the frailty status or score more than nutritional intervention alone, and those positive effects last longer than compared to other monodomain interventions, and it also improves muscle mass. I finished this with some quotes because this discussion is pretty sweet, and I think they made really great points.
Okay.
Frailty is a system-wide syndrome that demands a system-wide approach.
Yes, it is a holistic disease.
They agree with you. So I'm just going to read this part of the discussion. The role of exercise intervention seems primordial as a part of a multi-domain intervention. Exercise program characteristics, such as frequency, intensity, duration, and type of training, influence its effects and must therefore be optimized. According to the recent literature, an optimal exercise intervention for frail elderly is performed at least 3 times a week with progressive, moderate intensity for 30 to 45 minutes per session for a duration of at least 5 months. The optimal type of exercise intervention is a multi-component intervention, but depends on the outcome that must be improved. The content of the exercise interventions in the different studies in this review is diverse, including several interventions with insufficient training stimulus, for example, training only once a week. Exercise interventions with a clear, insufficient dose or intensity of training cannot be expected to have an effect. So that's something that I feel like Dustin is really big on, and everyone is really big on in this group, is appropriate dosing for exercise. And this reiterates that the importance of appropriately dosing your patients, or appropriately dosing the exercise you give to your patients.
Yeah, and it's not 1 to 7 sets.
Yeah. If you want to know what Tali's talking about, listen to the most recent Game Changers meetup episode. So then they go on to talk about malnutrition, which is really common in community-dwelling elderly. So the frail elderly tend to have lower intakes of energy, protein, and micronutrients than non-frail elderly, and they also have anabolic resistance, which is due to splanchnic sequestration of amino acids and decreased postprandial availability of amino acids and decreased muscle uptake of amino acids.
They basically don't absorb amino acid as well.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So what's really great about exercise is that it increases muscle sensitivity to amino acids. Hence why the exercise plus nutrition intervention together can be more than just the sum of their parts.
It's almost like the same with insulin.
Yeah. So guidelines recommend an intake of 1.2 to 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day for frail elderly. In addition, each meal should contain 20 to 40 grams of protein in order to stimulate muscle protein synthesis in the elderly. So there are variable types of nutritional interventions in this review, so they can't really make reliable conclusions more specifically than that. But they do state that teaching the participant to evaluate and adapt his or her own nutritional intake will improve the sustainability of the effect and the compliance to the intervention. So they found that there were no consistent effects of the multi-domain interventions on functional abilities, falls, quality of life, psychosocial behavior, or depression. And they state there were a few studies and a lot of them had really small sample sizes, so they had insufficient power. So they talked about how there were several recent systematic reviews that had inconsistent results about functional abilities and frailty, functional training. Like one of them said that it didn't really do anything, and another one said it was really beneficial to X, Y, and Z. Which I thought was very interesting.
Okay. I think we might check that out.
I think we should. Okay, that was the discussion. I'm going to end with reading you the conclusion. It's brief. These limited but promising data highlight the potential of the physical exercise component as a standard intervention component, optimally combined with at least a nutritional intervention. Hereby, adequate design of interventions will improve results. Multi-domain interventions were found to be more effective than monodomain interventions for improving frailty status and physical functioning. Also, a multi-domain intervention tended to yield more positive outcomes for muscle mass and strength. Eventually, understanding the contribution of each monodomain intervention would pave the way to optimize and prioritize the frailty syndrome management. Finally, diverse frailty definitions cause heterogeneous study populations and urge the development of an overall accepted operationalized frailty definition. Swish.
I'm glad you read this.
Me too. This article was awesome. So there's going to be a lot of links in the show notes for this one, you guys, just because there's so much interesting information that I think that a lot of our listeners would want to see. I really wanted to give our listeners like actionable interventions besides like, we don't know because there's no data. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this systematic review that was just published in May is a really good stepping stone. Like, take a look at those tables if you do nothing else after listening to this. These tables have excellent information in them. Thank you all for listening to the Senior Rehab Podcast. If you want to find out more or want to get in on the conversation, joining the movement that's changing the face of geriatric rehab, go to facebook.com/Senior Rehab Project. You can find us on Instagram now.
You can find us on Twitter.
That's very true. But the most active group of Senior Rehab Project listeners is on the Facebook group.
I'm Tali Spaceman.
I'm Erinn Carey.
And as always,
stay funky.
Hit me. Thank you for listening to the Senior Rehab Podcast. If you only listen to these podcast episodes, you are missing out on 90% of the Senior Rehab Project. Hop on over to seniorrehabproject.com where you can join the movement that's advancing care for older adults. You can join for free or become a part of the Game Changers where you can get some free gear and access to our monthly meetup. Just go to seniorrehabproject.com. I appreciate y'all, and I'll talk with you soon. But in the meantime, do not forget to stay funky.